then figure out what the next steps are.
Okay, so Molly, I read the agenda item, right? It says Office of the City Auditor's presentation of the construction project controls report,
Right.
right? So that was how it was agendized tonight, right? And controls, construction controls, aren't releases part of construction controls, or is that outside of construction controls?
I'm not saying that you cannot ask the question. The committee isn't able to take action on that tonight. Really, what's on the agenda is the auditor's report, not necessarily all aspects of the work of the Public Works Department. But there's a range of things you can ask about, and you have done that, and that's fine. I'm not sure what it is now you're asking. Are you asking?
What so, is it I mean, we're just a recommending body, right? So the recommending body would be like, hey, we want to recommend that we look at trying to get a lien release when we're making payments, right? And I'm trying to understand, is that really out of scope from the agenda item, given that sentence that's there? It doesn't seem like it to me, but you're the lawyer, so you tell me.
Well, it is out of scope, because what's before you is a report from the auditor. So he's done his professional work, he and his team, on this scope of work. And the question is the committee going to recommend that council accept the report? So talking about other kinds of policies that you might want to make with respect to the Public Works Department is related, but it's not really directly this bit of work that's before you tonight. Also, my larger concern, though, is that the council doesn't, for example, all the material in the construction administration manual that the auditors referred to, that really is within the purview of the manager and the people who work for the manager. And frankly, my office, we helped a lot on that as well. And so you can give general policy direction on issues related to that, but we wouldn't want council to involve itself with the details of construction project administration. Those are really administration and management type issues. So you want to give that direction to the city manager. So my suggestion is that you start there if you're concerned about this issue about lien releases. And then if you don't get a satisfactory response, let's talk again about what possible next steps are.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure when else we would talk about this.
I'm available to you anytime.
No, I mean, the same. I mean, I don't think this is agendized again for us. But Kyle, is this typical for most cities to get lien releases, or do they just do payments and not get lien releases?
I will say it's typically dependent on state law, and I'm not certain what the state law is in California. I'm doing a little bit of research in the background, and so that's really what it's dependent upon. And it might be in this circumstance that the subcontractor would have the ability to do that independent of whether or not the city is collecting them or not.
Okay.
So they have recourse that they can take on their own if they're not paid timely. I would imagine that would be that's what I'm preliminarily reading would be the case. But I'm no expert. I'm not an expert in the law. I must say.
And neither am I. This is a highly specialized area, so I have a team member and an outside counsel who assist us on these issues. And since the question is not contained in the audit report that's before you, I don't have the answer ready at my fingertips, but I can work on that also and send you a note about it.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Okay, yeah, I think the audit report is fine, Chair.
Thank you. So you second this,
Sure.
The motion. Thank you. Council Member Stone has joined us. Hello.
Hello. We should probably keep these at 7 versus early, because it's hard for sometimes when we work.
Okay, so Ms. Kang, can you take the vote?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Yes. Chair Koo?
Yes.
Councilmember Stone?
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka?
Yes.
This vote passes unanimously.
Thank you. And with that, we'll move to our second action item, which is Office of the City Auditor, presentation of the Utilities Power Purchase Agreement Assessment Report. Mr. O'Rourke.
Thanks very much. I'm resharing my slide deck here. Similar to the last report that we went through, I'll speak here for a few moments and then turn it over to one of our members of our project team. This report and work that we conducted was around power purchase agreements. We have a little bit of background information coming up here in a slide or two, but this is the mechanism through which the city purchases all of its electric power, which is then sold retail to your customers. So similar sort of background here, or rather agenda for this report. And before we get started, I just wanted to thank Dean and his team for their work in helping us, and I'm sure Stacy, our project lead, will comment on that as well. But they were a pleasure to work with, very responsive, and worked well during the kind of project closeout phase as well. So thanks to the team. Stacy, you met actually on our last meeting. She presented another report she managed, but Stacy, you might want to reintroduce yourself and then take it from here.
Sure, thank you, Kyle. Hello, everyone. Stacy Gill. I'm a senior manager on our public sector team. So I served as the lead for this PPA assessment that we performed. As Kyle said, just definitely wanted to note that, Dean and his team, the utilities department, were really great to work with. We work with a number of municipal utilities, and this group was extremely knowledgeable, in the various issues pertaining to PPAs and the power industry in general. So thank you all so much. I think we can just kind of talk through these initial considerations related to the report. So, first of all, just wanted to note that we did perform several test of controls for this audit, and to kind of see a description of each of the tests that were performed here. That's located in the audit testing section of the report. Secondly, power purchase agreements, PPAs, just a very general sense, the mechanism by which the city purchases all of its power. So I think a decision going back to 2013 to go fully renewable includes now 15 PPAs, which covers hydro, wind, landfill gas, and solar power. And then lastly, just to note, which I think Kyle had already noted for the prior report as well, there are the management responses included in Appendix E of the report. So approval of this report would include approval of those action plans as well that were provided by the utilities. Just to show a little bit of an overview, this chart is the annual spend for each of the PPA contracts over the past 2 to 4 years. So, as you can see, the dollars here are pretty significant. So, we're talking, multi-million dollars per year for the purchase of power. And, the largest of these include Western Area Power Administration and Calaveras, which are hydroelectric.
Before we jump to the next slide, I'll just say the reason we conducted this audit engagement was really a couple different reasons. First of which is what you're seeing right now, the dollars that flow through it. This is a high spend area. Secondly, we want to make sure these contracts are up and the management of them are operating effectively, in particular due to the city's sustainability goals. It's really critical that you all are purchasing renewable energy to meet your goals, and this is the mechanism through which you do that. So both a strategic risk as well as a financial risk.
Yep, and a background on our project. Our objectives here, one, were to gain an understanding of the processes in place for evaluating and entering into PPAs. So, the procurement and contracting side, but also those contract management activities throughout the life of the contract. Secondly, to evaluate the effectiveness of the internal controls across these process areas, as well as identifying any potential control gaps. And then lastly, to validate the accuracy and compliance of the PPA billings. So to do this, we developed what we call a risk and control matrix. So we documented the known risks. We mapped the utilities, current control activities to mitigate those risks. And through that process, identified any potential control gaps, or also, narrowed that down to the key control activities for our audit testing procedures. And then in addition to our audit testing, we performed a contract analysis. So I think there was a question that came up regarding the contracts and in terms of contract language, as well as the nature of those agreements. So we did perform a contract analysis against others in the industry. And this slide is just showing, some of the controls testing that was performed. So these are just a few examples. So here you can see T1 invoices and T10 billing and adjustments. These are related to the invoices and the payments. You'll see references to invoices as well as under T10, it says ARB there. So, that's the all resources bill that's coming from NCPA, which includes all of the electric charges and vendors in there. As part of this testing, we reviewed the invoices and the ARBs against the actual amounts that were paid. And that included, recalculating the adjustment between the estimated and then the actual amounts that were subsequently billed. In addition to that, we were also looking at things like the contracted rate, making sure that those were properly invoiced, as well as, other internal controls, such as ensuring that the payment claim vouchers were properly approved. T4 here related to purchasing and the procurement process. So, this was related to ensuring that the proper procurement procedures were followed during vendor evaluation and selection, and making sure that all the necessary tasks were performed prior to the commercial operations deadline, which was, tasks that were identified within the resource integration checklist maintained by the department. And again, these are just a few examples, but if you refer to the audit testing approach section of the report, you'll see a description of all of the testing performed.
And before I jump, I think,
and then to move on
to,
go ahead,
Stacey.
Kyle.
I just wanted to mention, I asked Stacey to include these examples. I think on the prior audit report, you saw us evaluating the internal control environment for the sort of capital expenses within public works. So it's internal control focused and looking at the design of those internal controls. In this case, we're doing what you likely, what folks likely think of internal audit, picking and tying type of testing and ensuring that those controls are operating effectively. We're doing recalculations. So these are some of the examples that are shown here. So just wanted to point out that there's a lot of testing that went along with this report, the typical testing you'd expect for internal auditors.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. So yeah, so there were really 3 recommendations that we noted as a result of no formal documentation of staff review of vendor compliance with PPAs. So, I just want to note, there are a number of various monitoring activities and meetings and things that are being held regarding the performance of these resources related to these vendors, but there was just no formal documentation or process in place to document vendor compliance with the PPAs. So our recommendation is more as it relates to implementing a formal vendor performance monitoring process. So, to periodically assess vendors for compliance and general performance. So again, this is more related to the formality of that. The second item noted no formal review or approvals of changes to front office models. So the front office model, that contains all of the data on the city's renewable energy resources, and it's tracking the projections of monthly generation and costs for each of those resources. So when changes are made to the models, there is kind of tracking in terms of who's making those changes. And I will note that, they are also, being periodically sent out to senior management and being looked at. But our recommendation here is just to have a more formal review and approval process for any changes that would significantly affect. And lastly, the third item, no CPAO audit of NCPA's validation of vendor invoices, contract rates, and payments. So currently, NCPA performs the settlement processes basically to verify the supplier invoice calculations, the contract rates, and the meter amounts. So they're doing that on behalf of the city. And this is just kind of one step further, right, as it relates to the supplier invoices. So our recommendation is that the utilities department implement a process to do an independent validation of those as well. So instead of just relying on NCPA's review to institute a review process themselves, which I think during the reporting process, which you'll probably see in the management response, they already had implemented after we had discussed this item.
So before we jump to sort of questions and discussion, it's probably good to ask Dean if he wanted to offer any comments. I suppose before that, as Stacy mentioned, at least one, if not two, of the corrective actions have been implemented since we've discussed this report over the last couple of months. I will say, just as a note, the city auditor's office goes through a process to independently verify whether or not those corrective actions have been implemented. I think we note that in the report itself, but just want to let you all know that in the next quarter, when we go back to look at corrective actions, we will indeed verify that these items have indeed been implemented as described. Ms. Koo, if it's appropriate, and if Mr. Batchelor wants to offer comment, it might be good to do so now.
Absolutely. Please, Mr. Batchelor.
Thank you, Kyle. On behalf of the utility team, we wanted to thank Kyle and especially Stacy and her team for walking us through these processes that we agree with. We found that we needed a little bit more of some checkup portions and some more documentation. We felt that we have a pretty robust management practices in all the findings that we have. And as Kyle mentioned, we have completed findings number 2 as well as finding number 3. Apologize for that, number 3. So we are working on our findings of number 1, putting some checklists together as we move forward with this. I also have Senior Resource Planner Jim Stack, who is with me tonight to be able to answer any of your questions. So again, we want to thank the Baker Tilly team for having this collaborative approach with us and very knowledgeable. We found that working with Stacy and her team, very knowledgeable from a utilities perspective and understood PPAs. PPAs. And so we appreciated all the work that they put into this because they put an awful lot of time in these audits. So we want to thank you, Stacy, for doing that.
Thanks, team.
Chair Koo?
Oh, thank you. So it's also really great to reaffirm that you do have a robust system in place to ensure all the check and balances and that you're handling such a big project or responsibility. So thank you for that. And before we take it to committee, I'd like to ask Ms. Kang to see if there's any public comments or questions. Thank you.
Yes, of course, Chair Koo. If any member of the public would like to speak on item 2, please raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9. And Chair Ku, I'm confirming that we have no public comment for this item.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to committee. Councilmember Tanaka, Councilmember Stone.
I just have one question.
Please.
Thank you. Just kind of a question on the process here regarding the report's recommendations. So are we being asked to approve these recommendations and refer them to the full city council? And so staff then needs to wait until the vote of the full city council to be able to implement these, or is staff kind of taking the recommendations and implementing them as they kind of go along?
So I guess I can let Dean speak to the second half of that, but we are indeed asking, that is the ask from sort of the city auditor's office. And I think as Dean mentioned, they aren't waiting for the council to approve before they act in this case.
Yeah, Councilmember Stone, we felt that we agreed with the recommendations from the audit, and that we wanted to put some additional documentation pieces in to the findings. So we have moved forward with moving that, and then we're working with Kyle and his team on our recommendations that we put in place, that they can verify that we're doing what was asked in our action plans.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for that. And thanks, Kyle, as always, for the report, and Stacy for your help as well. Appreciate the report and the staff presentation. Those are my only questions. I'm definitely happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka? I'll take motions too.
Yeah, thank you. So I saw the recommendations. How many invoices are there typically, like over the course of the year?
Jim, can you answer that?
I would estimate probably hundreds. I'm not the back office person, so I don't tabulate those numbers, but yeah, 15 contracts, at least monthly invoices. So.
I'm just trying to think of the sources of like potential fraud, right, or issues. Because it's pretty clear as to what we use, I would imagine. And you're just matching that up with the invoices being charged. So they're just matching, you're just matching there. And I mean, these are occurring every month, so they're fairly regular. And probably the payments, I mean, the people aren't changing too often, right? Because you have a fixed set of vendors. So, but by the way, Kyle, when you refer to front office models, what did you mean by that?
I could probably take that one for you,
Okay.
Councilmember. So the front office is the part of our organization that handles all of our purchases and is kind of the forward-looking side of things. We execute the contracts. So the front office models are the spreadsheet models we use to project forward our generation volumes and costs associated with the different projects that we contract for.
So you're basically trying to forecast what the price is going to be and who to buy from. Is that what you're trying to do?
Essentially, we're trying to, well, we know what the prices are in all of our contracts. We're trying to forecast how much generation to expect. That way we can estimate our costs going forward and properly set our rates.
Isn't it just a simple matter of whoever's the cheapest, use them first and then go to the next person and then the next person until you get the supply that you need?
It's a little bit more complicated than that because we have so many different contracts that we have to layer in over time as our demands change and as contracts end and others begin. We also have to kind of, balance, our interest in diversity of the portfolio. We don't want to have all of our contracts being, from solar, even though those are the lowest cost right now. To try to meet all of our sustainability goals and maintain, stability in our rates and our costs.
I would think that I would simply just whoever's the cheapest, and then use all they could provide, and then go to next higher up, right, and keep working your way up until you have it. But I guess it could be really hard to do manually if there's a lot of. Is this placed manually or is it automatic?
Is what placed manually?
So where we get the power from, like, do you have to? Is there an order place, or is there some sort of software running that just automatically awards it to the lowest price, or how does it work?
Well, when we're doing our contracting process for an individual PPA, is that what you're referring to? Signing a new contract? So we do a large solicitation and receive all the proposals, and we kind of feed all the data from the proposals into our sort of a spreadsheet model that we use to evaluate all of them. And then we kind of, apply our evaluation criteria, which is price, but also a few other things. It's mostly price, but yeah, and then it kind of feeds out a score for each proposal, and then we rank them.
Okay, so there's no dynamic pricing going on day by day. It's all set when you're in advance.
Typically our contracts are fixed price. Yeah, we tend to, prefer a fixed price in order to ensure stability, cost stability, and to hedge against market price fluctuations. You can do index priced deals as well, but we tend to prefer fixed prices for our long-term PPAs.
So, but we can't change where the power is coming from between different vendors dynamically.
The way contracts are structured, you typically have to contract for the full output or a certain fixed share of the output of a given resource. That's how they ensure financial stability on their end. The developer has to be able to ensure they have all the power sold so they can get it project financed.
So even if we need less power, so we just have to we still pay for it no matter what then, even if we happen to use less.
Typically, yes, that's correct. We receive all the power, and then we get revenue from that by selling it into the grid.
So we have to be really accurate in our forecast then, because we're basically locking it in for a year. That's
right. Yeah.
So how accurate are we actually in that?
We've seen our load declining over the past number of years due to behind the meter generation, people putting up solar panels in their own homes and stuff like that, and customers leaving our territory, which we do kind of account for customer generation in our models and our forecasts, but when a large customer leaves, that's a little bit difficult to anticipate typically.
So I guess how much power do we use versus how much do we forecast?
I think our annual consumption right now is a little bit less than 900,000 megawatt hours. And we, because of the nature of these contracts, we've signed them many years in advance typically. We do have a bit of an overall surplus of generation we've contracted for, depending on the hydro conditions, of course. That's a large chunk of our energy as well.
So you said we use 9,000 megawatt hours?
900,000, correct.
Oh, 900,000, okay. 900,000 megawatt hours. That's how much we used over the course of a year?
Correct.
Okay. And then how much should we forecast over the course of that year?
It depends on which forecast you're looking at. Typically.
Oh, the one we use for the PPA.
When you're only looking 1 year ahead, we're pretty close, within a couple of percentage points usually.
Okay, so we're buying this 3 years in advance, or how many years in advance?
A lot of our contracts are 20 to 30 years long.
Okay, well, that's like, so you have to be like that's crazy hard forecast then, to forecast that far in the future. So for then, okay, so for 1 year in the future, we're like just a few percent off. You're saying like 5% off type of thing? Or
usually less than that.
1%?
Less than that, a couple of percent.
Couple percent, okay, so maybe 2% off. Okay, and then what if for something that's 20 years in the future?
Well, I guess the situation we're in now is when we executed most of these contracts back in the 2005 to 2015 range. And we were, based on the load forecast we had made then, we contracted for a certain amount of power, and now we have a roughly an excess of about 10% compared to our annual need.
I see.
Just an average hydro situation.
I see. So we pay for 10% more power than we actually use.
Well, we pay for 10% more power than we're using, but we're receiving the revenue associated with all of that generation anyway. So it doesn't matter how much we're using. We're buying power and then we're selling it into the grid.
So if the excess that you purchase, you're reselling back to the grid.
Oh, I see.
So that 10% does not represent a financial loss.
I see. So if that's the
You're
case,
selling it at a loss per unit.
so I guess, I mean, that in some respects, then you could always buy way more than you need and just sell it off. But then I guess you run the risk that the price may be different.
Correct. It's also in violation of our city municipal policy, municipal code on speculation.
Well, I don't think you have to do it on purpose, but it's just, you don't want to run out of power, but you don't want to also like, so do we make a profit doing that or do we lose money?
Depends on market conditions.
Market conditions, yeah.
Okay, well, under the current market conditions, what's been happening?
Currently, prices have been rising the past few months. As you've probably seen with gas prices going up, that's affected the electric markets as well. So, having a little more power is probably good at the moment.
I see. So we're actually making money on this excess?
I haven't compared, what we're getting paid for our sales to the grid compared to what the contract prices are. So I'm not 100% sure about that.
Okay. Seems like a good thing to know, right? Yeah, I guess it's a very two-edged sword, right? To have such long-term contracts, because you have to really forecast things well. And I suppose if power prices increased, you did really well. But if you guessed wrong, it could also cost you a lot, I suppose, right?
That's right. Yep. That's the consideration we have to take into account every time we execute one of these long-term contracts.
Well, I think what's important then is to actually look back at your forecast and compare against what actually happened. Do you guys actually do that?
Yeah, we do. We do evaluate how our contracts have performed.
No, I mean, like our forecast, I mean, it's a contract, but it's also our forecast. How did our forecast perform? I guess what you call the front office model, right? How did that compare against what actually happened?
Yeah.
It just seems like it's really hard to forecast so far in the future.
Yeah.
That's what I would guess, right? And so there's a lot of risk from the city from that point of view.
It is, council member. It's the risk that we take with that portion of it. But like I said, with our modeling that we're able to do, as Jim mentioned, we're off by maybe 1 or 2% on any given time. One of the largest contracts that we have is the Western contract. And, we were in that contract for a 30-year period of time. It's coming up for renewal portions of it. We've been able to work out some deals with Western on this, is that anytime that they do an increase, there's a dropping off point for us now that we're not tied 100% into that 30-year period of time. So anytime there's going to be a rate increase to that cost, we can decide at that point to take less from a hydro perspective. So we're starting to look at some of these kind of longer term contracts that we have some points that we might be able to get out or not use as much in the long-term features on those long contracts.
So if we didn't do long-term contracts, because I would imagine that the power providers also, because they're not going to know their own costs, right? Like if someone's it might cost them more. Maybe the cost of labor is a lot higher, right? So it's going to cost them a lot more to produce that power. I would imagine that that because we lock in so we lock in the contract for like something like multi-decades, but then is the price locked in, or it's just that we have to buy, or both?
For most of them, it's both.
It's both. Okay. So for them to guarantee a certain price for such a long period of time, they gotta be like, mean, that's like long-term option, right? So they must be pricing that in versus if we let the rate float. We would probably get a lower rate, I would imagine, because they're taking a lot of risk to guarantee prices for such a long period of time.
So as Jim mentioned, we're starting to see gas prices rise as it is today. We don't have long-term contracts. We have short-term contracts, and it's costing us much, much more right now because of the market fluctuation portions of it.
Yeah.
Where at least with the electric side, it's a little bit more stable, and we're able to look at the long-term on that and be able to lock in the prices. So because as you well know, our commodity costs are half our costs.
Yeah. I guess this is like a fairly sophisticated kind of modeling you have to do to get it right. It would be really interesting to know how you guys are doing in this, right? In terms of accuracy, in terms of performance. Do you actually make money? Do you lose money? With it, because it's, I mean, altogether, it looked like it was a substantial amount of money, like tens of millions, right? And I looked at that graph. So it's a big chunk of change, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm looking across all of them. Like some of them are almost $12 million a year, right? So altogether, it's I don't know. I can't add up all these bars together, but it's a lot. Right? It's
around 60 to 70 million per year in our
yeah. So I mean, so even if just a 5%, 10% optimization means a lot here, right? We're talking about some big money here, even if it's small optimization. So are you guys planning to do some sort of review of how you guys been doing in terms of modeling and, like I just wonder, like, have you guys done a lot of optimization in this area? If not, are there plans to? Because it seems like this would be a really big area of opportunity for us.
If I might jump in, be worth Dean or Jim. Good evening, council members, Councilmember Tanaka, City Manager. Just might be a good time to mention the work that the UAC, the Utility Advisory Commission, does and has been doing over the last few years on energy purchases, not limited to the power purchase agreements, recognizing that those are a subset of the overall, but in particular with the Western Hydro contract, as well as there's some reference in the audit to our Utility Risk Oversight Coordinating Committee, which on an ongoing basis is involved in the decision, and again, driven also by council policy on the portfolios and how those are composed.
Okay, well, I don't think the question was answered, which is, are you guys planning to do a review of the modeling and the performance?
That was the answer, Councilmember Tanaka, that the Utilities Advisory Commission has advised the council and has done significant analysis of, certainly supported by staff, in looking at how to develop the best mix of power sources that balance the city's sustainability.
Sorry, I don't think you heard my question correctly.
I did hear your question, Councilmember, and obviously I'm not answering it in the way that you are looking for, but nonetheless, the fact remains that the UAC has a primary role in being the venue through which staff is presenting the analysis on costs and benefits for the city for these power purchases.
So my question actually is about, because you're having to long-term forecast, and which I think is inherently very difficult to do, at least to do very accurately. And so I think would be interesting is to see how does a forecast compare against the actuals, and then what is that actually costing us? So it's more of a review of our modeling, right?
With all due respect, Councilmember, I think you're quite a bit off the topic of the audit here of the power purchase agreements.
Okay, let me look at the agenda again here. So the agenda says Office of the City Auditor's presentation of utility power purchase agreement assessment report. So it's a pretty broad topic. Are you saying that we're not allowed to talk about modeling?
I don't think. Go ahead.
Yeah, Kyle, can you ground us in the scope of the audit? Because we're in a pretty big strategy discussion about power purchase strategies, and can you ground us in what it is that you were looking at in this audit?
We did not conduct the comparison that Mr. Tanaka is suggesting. So that was not included within the scope of work that we're discussing today.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I realize that, but I guess I'm just trying to understand from what's agendized, right? Which is fairly big topic. What can we discuss?
Right. So again,
Inu.
what's agendized is the audit report, not necessarily the general topic of utilities or the general topic of utilities power purchases. There's lots of times that council interfaces with that. There are policies that are set to frame these strategies. There's an arbitrage policy. These things come to council periodically, and all of the power purchase contracts come to council. So there's lots of opportunities for council to interface with those kinds of aspects of these types of questions. What's before you tonight, like on the prior one, is the audit that actually was done and prepared.
Well, right, and if I may, I just want to say also that in the Baker Tilly report, it does state that it's if we go into the staff report itself, it does state that it's about audit of the overall contract analysis was performed to review the PPAs that are entered into by the City of Palo Alto Utilities and making sure that it aligns with industry standards. So I think that's the scope, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. O'Rourke, but so we're operating under that scope.
That's correct. And actually, Councilmember Tanaka, I think potentially what might be beneficial is in Appendix B, we have all of the contracts listed out. And I'm not suggesting that the discussion that that we're going down right now may or may not be fruitful, but we're not entering into all 15 of these contracts at one point in time and sort of projecting 25 years from now what energy usage will be. Rather, these contracts are being entered into year over year over year. And if you look at the contract analysis, you'll see, I think the dates range from 2004 to 2018 maybe. And there's discussion around the Western contract that's ongoing right now. So there's opportunity to reassess and reevaluate, and there's long-term projections for all of, for the entire amount of power that the city needs can be reconsidered and considered for each individual contract. Probably not explaining that very well, but it's not a one point in time analysis without the ability to reconsider over time. And I guess the second mitigating factor being also that the excess power can be resold.
I hear you.
And so I would like to keep it within the scope of just analyzing and understanding, reviewing the report that was submitted in terms of entering into the contracts, the PPAs, and making sure that it reaffirms that our utility department is really taking the responsibility of entering into these contracts and vetting it through the utilities UAC, as well as presenting it before, should the contract need to come back for review, it does go through the finance committee as well. I remember going through it quite extensively when I was on the finance committee back in 2000 something 15, I think. And it was very extensive and very long and very thorough. So I think that there's that opportunity again now that the Western contract is going to be coming forward. So with that, I would like to see if there is a motion to accept this, to recommend City Council accept the report.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Do I have a second?
Yeah, I'm not going to second it because I think that I can't think of another time when it'd be good to actually look at the forecast. Because this is when a lot of times you're looking at just individual contracts versus looking at everything as a whole. And this is a chance to actually look at everything as a whole. I'm not sure if it falls under Kyle's purview though, or it's whether something that it should be. But given the nature of what we're doing, I think it does make sense for us to for us to kind of review how we're doing on our forecast. But it doesn't sound like what the city manager said is doing that at this point.
No, it's, Councilmember Tanaka, I think it really is at the time of entering into a contract, and again, the big one that is under current discussion is the Western contract. And so that's really the most substantive time at which the council would have the opportunity to discuss this issue of long-term forecast.
Yeah, I don't think so, because I think the issue is that the forecasting issue is an issue across all contracts, against all power sources, not against any specific one. And you can't look at it individually, you gotta look at it as a whole. And so I don't agree with what you said.
No, but my point is, if you're not entering into a contract, you have no action to take. And so it's the time that you're entering into a contract at which.
Yeah, I think you're missing what I was saying, which is that what I'm questioning is not an individual contract. What I'm questioning is the overall process of forecasting.
And I actually have to say that with this agenda item here at Policy and Services, this is not the place or time to address the forecasting.
That's fine.
We don't have.
You guys probably have 2 votes, so you guys could go ahead, but I will not be voting for this.
Okay, and in that case, I will second this. And if the clerk could take the vote, please.
Yes, of course. Chair Koo,
Yes.
Councilmember Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka.
No.
This will pass 2-1.
Thank you, Ms. Kang. And if perhaps maybe staff will provide when this will go before, when forecasting and the contract might go before UAC or the Finance Committee in order to help Mr. Tanaka be aware of that time, then he can also be kept up to date on that. And with that, so thank you so much to the Baker Tilly team and to Utilities, Mr. Stack and Mr. Batchelor. And we're going to move on to action item number 3, which is a City Council referral for the Policy and Services Committee to recommend strategies to support and strengthen neighborhood programs, identify gaps in existing neighborhood-based services, and evaluate new strategies as proposed in the colleagues' memo regarding a proposed program for neighbor connection. Does staff have a report for us?
I just have, I guess, the background information about why this is before the committee today, and then Councilmember Stone, I'll look to see if you want to provide some additional detail. But this, there are 2 referrals from the City Council that came to Policy and Services Committee. One from May, which is the one in front of you today, and the other is related to affordable housing, which came in August. So this item is coming to you as we are trying to make sure that you get all of the council referrals and are able to have the discussions that came from City Council. And the title of this item summarizes the action taken from the City Council when they sent this to the Policy and Services Committee. So this is an open discussion for this committee, but I did want to give that context. And Councilmember Stone, if you wanted to add as a co-author of the colleagues memo.
Yeah, I would just briefly add. Thanks for that, Chantel. I guess I could just speak on kind of the intent of the memo was really to more leverage that kind of what I think is really kind of the incredible talent and passion of our community, and really attempt to tap into that community in order to provide a greater opportunity for the city to partner with neighbors at the block level. Obviously I can't speak for Councilman McCormack, but I don't believe it was the intent of neither her nor myself of the memo to interfere in areas where work is currently being done by some of our really great volunteer and neighborhood organizations. I think that the hope of this, and especially kind of how the conversation at least developed at the council meeting as well, kind of narrowing it. I think the hope is to really kind of explore areas where we can find closer partnerships with the city and our city volunteers and organizations to identify possible gaps in service, and then to have that discussion, whether a new program can be beneficial to be able to help fill the void of maybe having a more formal and direct two-way communication between the city and our community at the block level, and maybe provide some functions that may not be currently in existence or may need additional kind of city support and resources. I do think tonight's conversation and potentially future discussions will be helpful in engaging our community and neighborhood leaders on what is needed. And if there's interest, then partnering together to develop a new program or helping supplement and build upon existing programs if there's sufficient interest. So I really see tonight as kind of an initial jumping off point to really engage in this conversation, not only with this committee and staff, but hopefully as well as some of our neighborhood partners. I did see there were a couple of emails came in from some of our neighborhood leaders that already are suggesting some great ways where we can identify some gaps or really supplement some existing programs. So I think already kind of the point of this memo and this discussion is already bearing some fruit, and I'm excited to kind of see this develop a little further to again see where there's room to continue to explore these and potentially build an additional program, whether it's a program that could stand on its own or to be able to help existing programs. So I think this conversation is going to be beneficial, and looking forward to it.
Thank you, Councilmember Stone. With that, we'll go to public comment. Ms. Kang, if you see there's any members of the public who'd like to make a comment, that would be great.
Yes, if any members of the public would like to speak on this. Oh, I think there's a slight echo. But if any members of the public would like to speak on this item 3, then please raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9. We have one public speaker so far, Annette Glankoff. Annette, if you can, let's see, unmute yourself. You'll have 3 minutes for public comment.
Hello, everyone, and I apologize in advance. My internet is unstable, so I may just disappear. Thank you very much for taking up this very important issue. And as my old friend John Northway said, the first thing you do is come up with the problem statement and then develop objectives and action items. So I would like to see a very specific problem statement, and there's lots of good material in what Councilmember Stone mentioned. Perhaps the problem statement is there gaps in support of neighborhood programs and volunteers. And I think with this problem statement, it would help define what the stakeholders are that you want to address. Next, come up with objectives. And as you do this, don't do it in a silo. This shouldn't be done in a vacuum. Don't come up with the lists yourself. Survey the stakeholders you want to support. Ask them for their advice, their priorities, and then listen to them. Collaborate. Objectives. My top one on this is make it easy to find a volunteer activity. So to this end, an action item might be to develop a volunteer portal with local groups, not the national groups that are on the current city's website. Do this again in collaboration with the stakeholders and make it user-friendly. And in our community, we might even consider doing this with other languages. In the time I have left, my second objective would be to embrace volunteerism. And the action items would include publicity as an action item, recognition, visibility for our volunteers. And with that, I will end. So thank you for considering these items, and as well as the detailed memos that I have already sent. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair Koo, we have no other public speakers for this item.
Thank you, Ms. King, and thank you, Ms. Glankoff. So we come back to to committee. So Councilmember Stone spoke. Would you like to continue or any more to add?
Well, I do want to thank you, Chair, and I want to thank Annette. I think again her I guess no surprise, the the member of the public who sent the email that I was referencing in my initial comment was from Annette, and I think a lot of those recommendations make a lot of sense. I do think this is an opportunity for us to be able to really engage these organizations in conversation and figure out truly what's needed. I mean, I'm a big believer in our neighborhood associations. I chaired the Midtown Residents Association. I served with Annette on that, and do believe this is an area where I've always felt that I'd like to see a closer partnership with our residents association. So I think this provides an opportunity to be able to do that and to find a way to be able to maybe formalize these roles a little more. But I absolutely agree. I think the first sorry, speaking a little too quickly. I do think it makes sense figuring out what are our objectives, what are the problems. I thought the issues that Annette identified make sense, and finding maybe some ways to be able to move this forward in engaging the community in a conversation. So I do think having maybe like a joint study session with like PAN leadership as well as ESV leadership, Cool Block leadership, and other community and volunteer groups really makes sense to be able to ask them, what do you need from the city? And maybe just be able to have some sort of set up some summit that the city can host to be able to figure out what is it that everybody's doing. And maybe through that process, we can identify kind of gaps in services and brainstorm what is necessary to ultimately get to the point to figure out, again, I think part of the intent behind this memo, what's the proper next step to be able to create these closer community bonds, and whether that's forming a new type of program to be able to kind of effectuate those goals, or whether it's building upon the existing programs. I think having these conversations will be helpful, and just having that community buy-in, I think is going to be a really critical next step. So I do think that seems to be a really smart way to go about this. I did that when I was on the Human Relations Commission. We held kind of a similar summit with regards to senior citizen services and brought together all these different service providers within the community, and it was great and accomplished exactly that goal. It was a way for not only service providers to feel like they were being included in the conversation, which I think is key. I don't think anybody's happy when they feel like government's kind of stepping in to try to fulfill a role that they are already doing. And so that allowed us to be able to have a very open conversation. And through that, we really did come out with a whole host of service gaps that we were then able to strategically move forward and figure out the best ways to be able to fill those gaps. So that was, I think that could be a helpful model here. Again, I think surveying neighborhood leaders is going to be key, whether it's through like a joint study session or a summit, or through some other type of survey, to be able to just really get a grasp on what are the problems and how can we be able to support those. Let's see if I'm missing anything, looking through some of my notes. So yeah, I mean, I think that's, again, I think this should really be kind of a jumping off point for these conversations. And again, kind of coming back to the memo, I think there are ways that it would be really helpful for the city to be able to create a relationship with individuals at the block level that might be able to create a more kind of continuous loop for the city and the community, whether that's community building or just being able to provide really kind of non-emergency information or non-climate information, such as cool blocks. So I think there are ways for us to be able to explore, again, how do we build that relationship between the city and our residents. Sorry. I'm not very articulate today after a long council meeting. We need gaps. I need one night off.
Thank you,
No
Councilmember
problem.
Stone. I know you also came from an ad hoc committee meeting just right before this, so there's a lot of things on your mind going on. So, Councilmember Tanaka, do you have any comments on this or questions?
Well,
Suggestions?
In general, I think that we're blessed in our community that there are a lot of people who want to volunteer and help out. I also was pretty involved in PAN. I was president of the College Sheriff's Resident Association many years ago, and so I definitely think engaging our neighbors and getting people involved in the city is a good thing, right? I think that's I think we want to support that. So I'm all in favor of it. I'm not clear with this current proposal though, in terms of like specifically what more do we do? I kind of saw the language, but we actually have quite a bit already. So I don't know. But to me, I'm all game for trying new things and trying to see how do we get more people to volunteer and engage with the city. So I'm like game to try stuff, but I don't know, maybe Councilmember Stone, you could talk a little bit more about, how you, because, I think this one thing that's cool about Palo Alto is we do actually have a lot of people who are engaged and volunteer and stuff like that. But, so maybe you could talk a little bit more why you think this structure will enhance that from what we currently have.
Well, I think the kind of original idea, and thanks for that question. The original idea was that we do have, we have neighborhood associations that represent the community at sort of the, kind of the larger neighborhood level, which is really beneficial and helpful. We have ESV and block coordinators that help on like the emergency side, but also, I understand they do more. They also do more as well, but kind of fulfilling that primary function. And then cool blocks that sort of serves that function with regards to kind of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I think the idea was, is there a need and a place for maybe an additional function? And again, maybe it's through a new program, or maybe it's leveraging those existing programs where the city, for example, let's say a new park is being proposed in a particular neighborhood or block, or maybe a street closure is going to be intended, to have an ability for the city to have to know like, okay, this is a block captain for that particular block that we can communicate with and share information with them to get that more kind of community engagement and feedback, and maybe also provide for some more community building, especially, of course, kind of coming out of the pandemic, the need for increased community. So I think it was looking at how can we just leverage a city, like you just said, that is already very engaged. Can we take advantage of that a little more and add to it? Or is that overburdening the system and the programs already? I think at this point, like we don't really know. And I think exploring this a little more would help.
Yeah, so I'm all for that. I think we could always optimize things more, and happy for us to try to do that. I don't know whether current structure is the best, or whether we jiggle things more, or kind of let things kind of naturally happen. I don't know, but certainly willing to try. I just know that we have a lot of things already. Like you mentioned a lot of them, right? And so, so it's just, how. And I'm just trying to think of like with one other thing, like that's kind of like another layer, right? And so I'm just trying to think of how does that commission with everything else, and how does that person get appointed? Do they get signatures from other neighbors? Like there's an election? I don't know. I'm just trying to think of how does all that get set? Do we just appoint them? But then do they really have buy-in from their neighbors? I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to think of how do we make it most effective? But I like the idea of what you're trying to do. I'm just trying to figure out the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, no, and I think you have reasonable concerns, and I definitely can't take credit for the idea. This is, Councilmember Cormack came up with this idea, and I think it can fill an interesting need. I mean, again, and there are some models already, like ESV. I think you really just kind of, like I'm a cool block. Yeah, I'm sorry, cool block. I'm a block preparedness coordinator, and reached out to the city and nobody else on my block was interested. And so I think there are models that can work, but yeah, but again, I think you're kind of identifying exactly why we need to continue this conversation and kind of and have these conversations with the community to see what's needed and what would really help.
Yeah, I think wherever gets more engagement, I'm all game for. So I'm not really fixated on it. I'm just trying to think of, because I think we have more than most cities, I think, right? And so we're gonna have one more thing going on. So just how do we, harness that energy? And, more importantly, I think we want people to feel like they're being heard and it's effective and, good use of their time and all that stuff. But yeah, anyways, I don't have too much other than I want to encourage you guys to do more. I just don't know exactly how to do it though.
So if I think some of the things that Ms. Glankoff has said is something to kind of look at. I also appreciated Ms. Furman's letter in to us, providing some model cities with websites on the city page that has a very robust volunteer portal. So I would highly suggest that would be one place to focus where the city can support by revisiting with the community in terms of what kind of website to put forward and to create where it is more locally centric, versus pushing to national ones. So that would be one area that I think that we can focus on. The other one is I hesitate, to give more for staff to do in regards to this, only simply because there is a robust volunteer group here in Palo Alto already. And so I think, staff had suggested designating an ad hoc, but it's a council ad hoc. So I wanted to kind of ask Chantal or Molly or Ed, would it be possible for policy and services to have an ad hoc committee to start working and surveying the different volunteer orgs here in Palo Alto, and just have a discussion with them to see what their needs and wants are?
I think in the context of this colleagues memo and the way that the referral came from the council, it may need to go back to council for some more definition on next steps. That said, just thinking about the timing, where we are in the year, we also have upcoming, in fact, I think next month you'll be talking about priorities for the upcoming year and leading into the priority setting session that will probably happen in January or February. So it is the right time to think about everything you just described. In terms of where the council wants our city to focus in terms of neighborhood engagement and how best to act on that. So I think you've got a couple of options for how to move forward.
Chair, can I ask a quick follow-up to that?
Yes, of course.
I was just curious, if our next step to city council was just to set up like a have the city convene a summit of community leaders or I don't know, study session, would that require like a full council discussion? Is that something that can just be set on consent and have kind of staff move forward on that?
I think if it's unanimous, your rules would allow that to be a consent item.
Okay, thank
you. Okay, so in terms of actionable, we would need to put together some action, some actions in order to recommend to council to approve or to discuss? Is that what we need to do tonight?
Well, perhaps maybe just a relatively simple component of that, as Councilmember Stone just described, if the recommendation was to hold a summit or some form of study session with neighborhood leaders, then that could be a simple consent item. And to whatever extent you want to define the scope and goals of that session, I think that would help your colleagues see the concept and allow it to stay on consent, to be honest.
And the study session would be something, or the summit would be something outside of council that's going to be put together, like the Girls and Women Summit, something like that.
That could be, yeah. Again, I think it depends on the committee's recommendation, and obviously at some point there's the resource issue that we would consider. So I think, again, depending on the committee's interest in your concept of what it would be, there's the relatively small to the relatively large version of it.
Okay. Which is why, with the study session and summit, what I see is it's going to take a lot of staff time, and with a study session, potentially council time, putting it onto the agenda and so forth. And I think this would probably require a lot more collaboration and surveying the different volunteer groups here in Palo Alto, and referring a request to council to create a council ad hoc committee. It would give us more time, and also not have that much staff involvement. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the ad hoc committee can pretty much go out and meet up with the different groups, correct?
Sure, I think that's certainly your prerogative. Just mechanically, I'm thinking that your typical procedure for an ad hoc would be that the mayor would identify the council members that would participate, and we've seen those ad hocs range from, again, relatively small duties to very large duties.
Well, I know the sustainability one is a huge one, so it's not going to get. I don't believe it would get that way, but so yeah, I'm hoping that we can keep that small.
Or just for the sake of discussion, if the concept was perhaps to start with a study session where, again, this can be relatively simple, and let's say we typically allocate 1 hour of the council's time on a topic. So if the concept were, and I'm sorry, I'm sort of ad-libbing this, early in the new year, a study session inviting neighborhood associations and neighborhood leaders to come and to discuss with the council what was discussed here, things such as where are the gaps in services, what are the priorities from a neighborhood association perspective, then that's again a fairly contained level of effort. And then staff could organize that and help put together an agenda that would at least have that be a start for what could be a larger effort, but is not necessarily so.
Okay, so we can put that as a possibility, a study session to get started. The other thing is, we have neighborhood. So Palo Alto Neighborhoods is an umbrella organization. And then we have all the different neighborhoods with their own neighborhood associations. Some is more formalized, more formal, where they have the association, and like CTRA, College Terrace, there's Barron Park Associations, the MRA. And then, Crescent Park has a little bit of a less formalized, but they do have their own email list. I believe Old Palo Alto might have one as well. Charleston Meadows and so forth, Adobe Meadow. So, what would, I think that I think that it will be important to support each of these neighborhood associations, but also for some of the other areas, how do we go about into encouraging those neighborhoods to also formulate a neighborhood association. So just kind of having a little bit of a open discussion here into kind of putting something together. What are your thoughts there? How would the city be able to support something like that?
Yeah, and as you point out, just even with the list you just described, the phrase that comes to mind is "one size does not fit all." In that there's such a variety of both level of formality as well as method of communication and frequency of communication as well. To your earlier discussion, it may be that what we need to do is to take some incremental steps to identify how best to both work with the existing organizations as well as invite others. Yeah, I think your earlier point that this could be a lot of work is very true. Because I could see if it were a study session, again, that would typically attract the existing established organizations, but then what does that mean to those that are not? And in all likelihood, to reach and facilitate engagement from neighborhoods that aren't very well organized, I suspect we may need to do some form of almost open house invitation and maybe even some capacity building for how to organize. We have your Know Your Neighbors grant program that can be a useful tool, and it's almost a opportunity for existing organizations to share their expertise with potential new organizations as well. So yeah, it could be quite involved, and really a question of how we might scope and take steps.
So that goes back again, perhaps, to that study session, right? To kind of put together a list of possibilities to explore, but in collaboration with all the volunteer groups here in Palo Alto. So back to study session then.
Sure.
Okay. And I see, before I go on with other questions, I see Councilmember Tanaka's hand up.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I've just been listening to the discussion, and I really like what Councilmember Stone and Cormac are trying to do here. I think we all support it, but I just don't know whether having the 7 council members talk about it in a council meeting is the way we're going to solve it. I wonder if it's better for Councilmember Stone and Cormac to kind of work on their own, work, engage with the various community leaders, and then try to figure out like what they think and what will work, because I think this is not this is all about mechanics. How do we get the mechanics working? How do we get people engaged and volunteering? And I think it's probably better for a small set of council members to try to drive this forward versus, because I don't think like a whole group of 7 of us is going to add a lot of value versus what Councilman Stone and Cormac could probably just do by engaging with the community and trying to figure out a way to kind of optimize our volunteering within the city. So I'm just thinking that might be a better way to move forward. And then once they really have this fully baked and fleshed out with all of the community members, then we could come to us. But I think for us to figure out council, I think that's gonna be a really hard thing for us to do. That's my sense of it.
Well, I think that's going to be a recommendation to council then, in order for, it still needs to go back to council for them to direct whether it's Councilmember Stone and Councilmember Cormac who's going to be reaching out and working this out with the community, or is the mayor going to decide on an ad hoc committee and who to appoint to the ad hoc committee? And then there's also perhaps the recommendation to council to have a study session to put forward some of the different steps that the ad hoc committee can work toward. So if, I mean, that's certainly something that we can put in the motion as a recommendation. I do have another question. In terms of the website, is there, that would also be a recommendation to council in order to have the website looked at, so that, and to work in collaboration with the community as to what a robust volunteer portal will look like? Or is this something that we can do here?
I do think that, well, first off, we would want to have our staff involved with that, to join in the conversation. Megan principally, but also there are a few others that would be involved. I only know enough to be dangerous here, and maybe not only the dangerous part, which is I know that sometimes with setting up portals and in particular the content itself can get a bit sticky as to what we can include and not include as a public agency. So I would just suggest that that's something that we might, you might refer to staff for review and development of recommendations.
And if I can just add a quick note on that, I think there's two things. One is the information that currently exists on the website about different programs, making sure that's up to date and reflecting the program and how people can participate. And I'd say that's a lighter lift. The creation of a new portal, I think, would be some more work and take a lot of coordination just to make sure that we, like I imagine, I forgot what the national site is called, but it's you list all the opportunities and people can sign up, connect, and sign up for something through the site. I think we would just want to be making sure that we're creating something useful, to Ms. Glankoff's point, of something that's user-friendly. And I think that would be more work.
User-friendly, but also directing to what is available locally for people to volunteer for whatever their interest might be at that point. There's always a role for somebody. And I think one of the things that we don't want to forget is that we have these volunteer groups, and a large number of them have already been volunteering for years and years. So definitely don't want to not recognize that, you know. And so I think that's an important point to keep. The other thing is, is it possible to also recommend to City Council to refer to the City Schools Liaison Committee to explore establishing a linkage between the schools and neighborhoods? Because a lot of things that happens in the neighborhoods also involve the schools. So PAUSD, and could that be something that we can start up at City Schools Liaison Committee, so that they could kind of have council refer it to them, so that they can start trying to see if there's a way to have a development of a relationship and volunteerism with the schools between.
I think it's fair game as a recommendation from PNS to the council, and initiates a conversation.
Then there's the Know Your Neighborhoods grant, right? My understanding on it, when I've applied for it in the past as a community leader, was that for the event, you take pictures in order to write up your report to provide to the city as to how that event built community. So I was wondering, is there a website that we have where some of the Know Your Neighborhood grants and how it's been used and also, you know, the event itself with the pictures, just so that people can get an idea of what kind of events that they can host using the Know Your Neighborhood grants to further building community and to get to know each other, right? But I know that, you know, when I was at the Barron Park Association, I did the movie nights in the park, diversity events, you know, having Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year, as well as Diwali and Holi. And I took a lot of pictures, but I haven't been able to find where they all are, you know. And I know that there are other neighborhoods that have other blocks and neighborhoods that have done different with different ideas, but bringing community, emergency prep stuff and so forth. So I think that's another area that maybe we can have more kind of look what other neighborhoods are doing, and you can do it. So encouragement of having more people look into building community and supported by the city through the Know Your Neighborhood grants.
Yes, I just wanted to answer your description of that program is spot on, and the website doesn't currently have past events on there with some of the photos submitted, etc. But that's something that the staff is open to considering doing. Thank you.
Okay. Lastly, you know, some of these, I didn't mean to say lastly because it's never last. Some of these neighborhood associations, you know, they really don't have a place to operate out of. Say, for example, PAN, Palo Alto Neighborhoods, which is an umbrella group, right? So a lot of the different neighborhood associations and different neighborhood representatives come together for monthly meetings, and it oftentimes happens in somebody's house, and sometimes there's not enough space. Is there a way that the city can look into providing a community space that would be of no charge, and then that it would forego the insurance needs?
I think that'd be also something we'd want to have staff take a look at and identify what a best recommendation would be and how something like that could work.
Okay.
So, Chair, depending on what the committee wants to do with this item tonight, perhaps what we might do is ensure that we have appropriate staff join a future meeting. If you wanted to keep this in committee for another discussion, that would include Megan Horgan-Taylor with respect to the website, and Kristen O'Kane, I think, would be certainly appropriate for discussion of community center use and understanding what would be involved there.
Okay, so I think that is a good suggestion. If my colleagues agree, then if that's the route that we go for now, is to have it on and continue this. Is the word continue the right word? To continue this with with the staff members that are involved. To help us move forward. Is that good with my colleagues?
Yeah, I think that makes sense for next steps.
Okay with that.
Okay. So I move we continue it to the next time.
Another meeting is
another meeting.
Because your December meeting, I think, is already full.
But I don't think it needs a motion, right? Is that something that we need a motion on, or no? Okay. So at least for tonight, we conclude there, if that's all right with everybody. Okay, then we can go to the next agenda item, which is meetings and what is on the next agenda. Future meetings and agenda.
Yes, thank you, Chelsea. For December, we're bringing the council priorities as well as combining with that the city council protocols and procedures. I know this committee had an interest in being able to make some suggestions to council. We are actively working on the handbook cleanup, but you'll have one combined item there, and I'll be sending an email to the council members this week asking for suggestions for council priorities, which you will discuss at your December meeting. Also at December, you will have another audit from Kyle's shop, and we will have the legislative guidelines discussion as well. So those are your 3 December items. You have beyond that on your pending list, the item we just continued. We also have the second council referral related to affordable housing from August. That is also on your pending list. And the race and equity update, which would have been in December, I moved that to February. So we'll have tons of updates there. Your first meeting of 2022 will likely be in February. So
Okay.
that's what's forthcoming.
Okay. And we're going to keep the policy and services meeting until the end of the year at 7 p.m. to start at 7 p.m. Just so that we don't confuse and everyone. And then we'll just have the discussion of, for the new chair or whomever it is, whether they want to move it to 6 p.m. Okay. Is there any other comments? No. Okay. With that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much and have a good night. Thank you, Danny.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you all.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Good
Thank you,
night.
Mahia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vin. Bye bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.